Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. I wanted to touch on Hellions and Reavers again. We covered them earlier, and now that we've had a data slate and some points drops, I wanted to kind of go back over to them and kind of talk about those again. First, we're going to go over data sheets, and then we're going to talk about whether or not each one has a role or a use, and then we're going to talk about what their biggest draws or pros and cons are, what's holding them back, and we're going to do that for both Hellions and Reavers. Let's start with Hellions. First of all, they do move 14 inches. They're T4. They're 2 wounds. Again, we've talked about them before. They can fall back and shoot and charge, and with a stratagem, they can advance and charge. So that gives them pretty good mobility. It's not as good as it used to be, and I know we say that a lot sometimes. It's not as good as it used to be. They were better in ninth, and I don't say that to keep harping on the differences between ninth and 10th. It's more just to illustrate how things have changed. Hellions were, for me personally, a staple in almost every list. I loved them. They hit really hard. They did what they were supposed to do. They were exceptionally mobile, especially once you got your advance and charge on your power from pain bonuses. So it's one of those where they were really good for me and my style of play. I have kind of struggled to implement them as successfully in 10th, but I also, to be fair, haven't put them on the table in a bit, which is why we're reviewing them. They can take a splinter pistol and then splinter pods. The splinter pods are 2 shots. They are anti-infantry 3 plus, assault, and twin linked. So that means they can advance and shoot, and then the strat lets them charge, which does open them up for different things, which we'll cover in the pros and cons. Your melee is going to be strength 4, neg 1, 2 damage with 3 attacks per model. And you can take the Heliarch weapon on the Sergeant, which just gives you 5 attacks at 311. Honestly, I would just keep the Hellglaive on the Sergeant. I wouldn't give it the Heliarch weapon. I would keep that 2 damage. It's better than having the 2 extra attacks. The Heliarch can also be equipped with a Phantasm Grenade Launcher. Again, it's free, so there's no reason not to, and it just gives the unit the grenades keyword. That's one of those design choices that always baffles me. Like, just give it the grenades keyword and say that it has it. Don't make it a free upgrade for something like that. It's silly. And then the other thing you could do is you could take them at 5 or 10 man units at 100 or 200 points. Pros and cons. So the pros are that they move 14 inches. That's one of the more mobile units in the game, honestly. They are T4 and 2 wounds, which is, in the context of the rest of the army, pretty good. Most of our army is T3, 1 wound, T-shirt save. So having T4, 2 wounds is pretty solid, even though that they still just have the T-shirt save. Their special ability to fall back and shoot and charge is really good, especially if you can tag them into the right units. You don't want them in extended combats, but if they do get caught up in one and don't die, the ability to get out of there and change targets or just jump back in to get their fight first is good. Melee attacks are strength 4, neg 1, and 2 damage, which again is solid in the context of 10th. And sustained hits is also really good, especially when layered with the pain tokens. You can fish for those 6s. You can turn 15 hits or 15 attacks into 15 hits pretty reliably. And like I said, the guns are assault. They can get the grenade keyword. Having assault does open them up to be able to advance and use the grenade strat, or advance and cleanse, advance and investigate signals. It does give them a lot of flexibility in what it is they can do. The cons, though, let's start with the fact that they're no longer infantry. That was a big hit for them. It makes their 14-inch movement really feel like it's about 8 to 10 in most situations. Having to fly over terrain instead of just moving over it like flying units used to really just makes them a lot less maneuverable than some of the other options in your army. Really, witches, for the most part, are just as maneuverable simply because witches can move through all the walls. They don't have to go around things. No advance and charge without the strat. That is something that I have kind of bemoaned since this index has come out, is that really all the witch cult stuff just needs advance and charge. If they got that, that would go a long way to helping this army climb up the ranks a little bit. And then I think they're still overpriced at 20 points a model, honestly. If you look at Vanguard vets, which are a Space Marine staple, They have a 3-up save, a 4-up invuln, and they're 21 points per model, and they're infantry, and they have better strat and character support. Sure, they only have strength 5, neg 2, 1 damage weapons, because I think they just take heirloom weapons now is how it works out, and they just count as like power swords. But they're way more maneuverable, and they have better character support because you can put characters in them. You cannot put characters in with Hellions. So you're just raw dogging the data sheet with Hellions. There's nothing you can do to make them better other than stratagems. And then, I look at the analogs in other armies and they're just better, more efficient. Now, I will say before we move on, I don't think making them cheaper is the play. Now, if they made them cheaper, I'm not going to complain. Like if they came down 2 points a model, dropped down to like 18 points, a unit of 5 now costs 90 points. I'm not going to bitch about it. But I just think that data sheet tweaks are a much better course of action for some of these units that just feel very lackluster. They do have uses and roles, and at 100 points, I don't remember what they were before the data slate. I want to say they were like 120. They were not cheap, like ridiculously expensive. They might have been 110, but that's still a pretty hefty points drop. That's about a 10% drop, even if they were at 110. They don't have deep strike. So you either start with them in reserves or you start with them on the table. Obviously, that's going to be very matchup specific. It's going to depend on what style of game you're playing. So I can't sit there and tell you what it is you should do with them without having more information. If you're playing against somebody with a lot of indirect, like guard or, the classic 10th edition Eldar list that's just spamming night spinners and the incarn and stuff, you're probably going to want to start with them in reserves and then bring them on the table, because if your opponent knows how fast they are, there's a good chance your opponent is going to target them first. That being said, if you have a few units of them, maybe you start with them all on the table, understanding that you could lose one very quickly and you just accept that. If you do start with them on the table, they do have the mobility to kind of get into good positions to prepare you for later turns. I know it says at the bottom we're going to jump to a table, but we're not. I wrote this out, and then as I started recording it, I realized that I've already done a lot of videos on how to move and position this unit. So just dig through. I'll see if I can find one. I'll put a card in, or I'll put it in the comments, because there's no reason for me to go ahead and go over it. Most of you have already seen my thoughts on how to position these guys or ladies, so I'm not going to bang you over the head with another extra 10 minutes on the video that explains how to move them. In my opinion, if you want them to be a very killy unit, you bring 10 models. And that's so you can get your full 30 attacks. You need to, if you charge them and you want them to be killy, you need them to kill whatever it is they're fighting. And here's why I say that. If we charge 5 assault intercessors, we're going to swing 15 dice. If we empower them, we're going to hit 10 out of 15 times, and then we're going to re-roll those 5 and pick up with another 3 hits, right? So we're going to hit 13 out of 15. And once you account for your 6s explode, it comes out to about 15 out of 15. When you hit on 3s re-rolling 1s, you average roughly 100% hit rate. Now you're going to average 7.5 wounds into those assault intercessors, which means you're either going to put 3 wounds on them. Well, not 3. You're either going to put 7 or 8. And then your opponent's going to fail half of those. So basically, they're either going to lose 3 intercessors or they're going to lose 4 on average. That's if you empower them, though. If you don't, they're losing 2 to 3. Let's say they lose 3, they swing 2 back. Assault intercessors, I believe, get 4 attacks because of their chainsword. I could be wrong. But if you've got 2 that are swinging 4 attacks, that's going to be 6 hits, which is going to be 4 wounds, which means they're going to kill 2 of your Hellions on average because you just have a 5-up save. So the chainswords being neg 1 push you at a 6, you're probably failing all 4 of those saves. So it's one of those where you just killed maybe 60 to 80 points worth of models, but then you immediately picked up 40 points worth of models in the swing back. So you want whatever they charge to just die, because they don't survive punchbacks. Even guardsmen can put enough dice into them that they're going to kill some of your models. If you want them to be a more utility unit, you bring a 5 model pack. And before not to digress, Most of you know me. You know I can get a little wordy. I will say if you bring a 5-man, they're still going to hit well. Like, they're not terrible. It's strength 4, neg 1, 2 damage. They're not a trash unit. In the context of Melee in 10th edition, they are a solid unit. They just don't expect them to punch above their weight class the way they used to. They have assault, so they're great for things like cleanse, investigate signals, things that allow you to use their mobility and interact with the game. The fact that you can advance in grenades means you can chip damage off of things before you charge it as well. Grenades is a very underused stratagem for me. It's because I tend to forget that it exists. Even with my orcs, the only time I really remembered it was when I played at Tampa. Most of the stratagems I used were either grenades or tank shock, and that's because I tend to play without them, not because I'm like, "Ha, look how good I am," but it's like the armies I play don't necessarily generate a ton of CP. Like orcs can get an extra with Gretchen, but when I was at Tampa, I played 8 rounds. That is 5 turns around. That's 40 rounds. My Gretchen that whole day generated 4 additional CP over the course of 40 rounds on a 4-up. And that is not a joke. So it's one of those where I just am used to not having command points, so I don't think about using them for things like grenades. I have started to open my mind up to it a little bit more, especially as I've realized certain things have grenades, like with the orcs, the bikes have grenades, the coptas have grenades. Witches having grenades is pretty spicy, and Cabalites having grenades is pretty good, especially because Cabalites can shoot, etc. Not to get on another tangent, but don't forget you have grenades, guys. Don't be like me. Be better. Same thing I tell my kids. Don't be like dad. Be better. Be better than me. But it does allow for a lot of high mobility. They're just they're not as mobile as they used to be, but you can still take advantage of the mobility that they have. And don't forget that if you have the extra CP, you can fire and fade them for an additional 14 inches of movement at the end of your shooting phase as well. So if you need them in a corner or you need to get them to a certain place, like you have a lot of mobility for them. Like I said, we're not going to jump to the board. I'll find a link and a card, or I won't. It's 50-50. But if you do want a video that shows how to position them, if you want me to cover it again, talk about it in the comments. Drop a comment, let me know, and I'll just do a whole video about positioning. That way we're not breaking this up into different segments. What I think is holding Hellions back, right now, they're, in my opinion, a very average unit. Like if we took the standard S to F tier list, I would put them right around C. However, we're saying that they're a very average index and what is largely considered one of, if not the worst index in the game right now. So that basically means that they stack up against some of the worst units in other indexes. And really, like I said, points are the biggest issue. They don't do enough for their cost. Like I said, they're about the same cost as a Vanguard vet. Assault intercessors with jump packs are cheaper per model and just have better support. So, yes, they could go down in points, but like I said before, I would much prefer some sort of data sheet tweak. I don't want to necessarily have a horde army. I already have one in my boys. I would much prefer an army that can actually perform the way it's supposed to. Losing infantry does hurt them more than it helps. Anti-infantry doesn't affect them, but it slows down a historically fast unit. And what I mean by that is, you know, again, if we look at the context of 8th and 9th, they were they were very fast. They could move anywhere they wanted to. They could move through terrain, etc. They cannot do that now. So what is typically been a very shock and awe lightning fast unit is hindered just a little bit by the tweaks to movement and infantry. Their melee is okay, right? Like I said, it's not the worst. I just feel like the witch cult units need to hit a little harder. Maybe witches go maybe everything with witch cult goes up by 1 strength except maybe Reavers. Maybe Reavers get their pip of AP. I could talk ad nauseum about the issues with melee in 10th edition and my issues with Drukhari melee in 10th edition. I'm gonna try to not go down that rabbit hole, but like I said, maybe bumping things up 1 pip of strength or some sort of anti-infantry vehicle monster strat would help a lot. Even if it was a 2 CP strat that just gave you access to, you pick one of those keywords and you get anti that keyword for the rest of the phase, only use it in the fight phase, only on Witch Cult, anything like that goes a long way to help making them feel just like they're worth their points. I am going to a GT at the end of January. I'm running Hellions. Don't give a shit. I haven't put them on the table since my league, and I just want to. I will be starting a new league here pretty soon. I'm going to start organizing that as well. So we're going to start looking into more league style videos like I've done in the past. And, we're going to start moving forward with some more 40K content again. I needed a break. I told you guys I needed a break. I took one, got through a lot of the like GW build and stuff like that. So we're ready. Now we're going to talk about Reavers. These have never really been bad in the context of 10th edition. I would give them, again, if we did a tier, I would give them a B tier. And actually, before I dig into this, what are the thoughts on getting my opinion on a tier list ranking for units? Keep in mind, like, I play a little bit different style than it sounds like a lot of you play. I tend to be a very melee centric player, and I tend to, like, all balls, no skill, right at people. You know, back when I was a kid and I played Magic, I played green. I'm going to tap all my creatures, I'm going to attack you, and I'm just math is for blockers. That's just kind of how I play games. But if my version of a tier list is something you'd like to see for Drukhari, let me know. I would happily do it. It would take me a while to get it together, but we'll do it. Drop that in the comments also. So we already know Reavers move 16. The splinter rifles are assault. They can get 1 heat lance for every 3 models. You could take a blaster, but I don't know why the hell you would. Honestly, they're the same range. The heat lance is just better at strength 14, neg 4, and melta 3. Like, sure, the blaster gets +1 damage all the time, but the heat lance is just better. So I don't understand why you wouldn't just take the heat lance. The blade veins, strength 4, no AP, like they kind of suck now. Losing that pip of AP is kind of relevant, although they will go into softer targets a bit, like guardsmen. Agonizer is solid. I would there's no reason not to because it's free, but I would take the Agonizer. It's anti-infantry 3+, and you get 4 attacks with it. So at least you can bonk. Um, Outside of that, every time they fly over a unit, you roll a die for every model in your unit. On a 4-up, you do a mortal wound. It's okay. It's not my favorite ability. To me, those are kind of boring. Koptas have the same thing. There's a handful of other units that have it. Like, it's just kind of boring, but you're gonna get a lot of use out of it with a 16-inch movement. Their war gear upgrades, you can either take a cluster caltrop or a grav talon for every 3 models in the unit. So here's my issue with that. If you take the cluster caltrops, you get to reroll 1 die for every 3 models in the unit. So if you have 3, you're gonna average 1.5, and then you reroll 1, you're just gonna average 2. 2 mortal wounds. And again, not that that's bad. You get to chip wounds off of things. And if you've got 6 and you take 2, you're going to average probably 4. So again, that's better. Then the Grav Talon gives the bearer's melee weapons lance. Well, the Agonizer has anti-infantry, so really all it means is if you charge something that's not infantry, your Agonizer is going to wound it on 5s instead of 6s. So it's one of those where the Grav Talon's not really worth it. If it gave the unit Lance, I'd probably take it. But getting Lance on a strength 4 0 AP attack is kind of irrelevant to me. I would just take the cluster caltrops. Like I said, I would probably, if I had to rank these in a tier list, I'd probably put them at B. I'd put the Hellions at C, and you could make a strong argument for Hellions maybe being D-ish. But I personally, because of how I play, I'd put them at C. 16-inch movement's real good. Again, one of the fastest units in the game, and They are Witch Cult units, so they can advance and charge, and their weapons have assault, so they have a lot of mobility and flexibility. I will say that with Reavers and Hellions both, if your deployment is good, if you draw behind enemy lines turn one, it isn't necessarily a throwaway. You can close that gap depending on deployment zones and deployments. You can close that gap and get into deployment zones if you've positioned well, but it's one of those where you have to have played well and your opponent has to have put things where you can tag them. So it is what it is. They do have better saves, better guns, and better movement than Hellions, but they're only 3 1/3 points per model more. So again, it's just another example of why this index is not good. Is when you have two units that fill essentially the same role, but one is just inherently better because it's cheaper. Like, yes, the Hellions have better melee, but because 10th is largely a shooting edition, much more so than even like 9th and 8th, having better melee doesn't necessarily do anything for you. Cons, the Caltrops and Grav Talons, like I said, they're not the greatest. I would take the Caltrops over the Grav Talons just because re-rolling that die is going to do more for you than getting Lance on a 0 AP attack or a Strength 3 attack. It doesn't matter. But overall, like I said, it's a solid unit. Again, we knew they were. We've talked about them. And the only reason I brought them up is because I was looking at them and Hellions as I prepare for this GT. Reaver uses, like I said, they do pretty much everything Hellions do. They just don't melee as well, but everything else they do, and they actually just do it a little better. You know, the heat lances, having heat lances that hit on threes instead of fours, i.e., your birdies, scourges, and then the Talos, hit on fours, going to fives if they're -1. So having heat lances that hit on fours, even if it's only one or two, is going to make your opponent go, "Oh shit, I have to respect that unit because it could put a lot of damage on me." And with a 16-inch movement, you can get them within 9 inches of things. Obviously, you're still going to be susceptible to Overwatch. That's a thing to consider. Although Overwatch has gotten slightly toned down because of not being able to be on Titanic units and things of that nature. Splinter rifles aren't twin linked, but the pods are, but really they're the same weapon. So it's one of those where when you have the same gun but better gun options, you're just going to have better shooting. Smaller units of Reavers make them a little bit easier to maneuver and hide. You can take 3 or 6, and, it's 70 or 140 instead of 100 or 200. And really, I don't need to do a walkthrough with these because we've already talked about it with the Hellions. We've talked about it ad nauseum before. If you want that walkthrough positioning video, let me know, and that's what we'll do. We'll just spend a whole video doing it. I think Hellions got better. I think they went from an FD tier unit to a C tier unit with their points drops. I do think they're overshadowed by some of the better units that we have or other units that just do the same thing and are cheaper, i.e. Reavers. They do have a lot of utility and uses, but there's just something they need to help push them over the top. You know, I'd like an ability or data sheet change, but I don't think that's happening. I'd like to see melee maybe hit strength 5 or something. But I think for the most part, GW is sticking with points as long as possible, unless you're just really, really bad, i.e. AdMech. Reavers fill the same role, or Death Guard, I should say. Reavers fill the same role, like I said. They just do whatever it is that the Hellions do, but better outside of the fighting. I want to play a witch-heavy list in January when I do this GT. I don't know if I'm going to. We're going to test it. I've got a game tomorrow against an exceptional Tyranids player. We'll see how that goes. I don't know anything about new bugs, so that's going to be nice to be able to learn that. I haven't played much 40k lately, so it's going to be nice to get back on the table. I am going to maybe do a list video coming up this week. I have an AOS GT this weekend for Veterans Day. That's a big happy Veterans Day to me. And my list is bringing every AOS model I own, which is 70 Dryads, 2 Tree Lords, Durthu, and 2 Branch Witches. And, it's just funny. It's what we do. It's funny. I'm here for the memes. I will have a league coming up. We're going to get back into league play. And then I'm going to be scheduling my events. And then there's a doubles tournament in December. So, look forward to that. And man, you know, Sorry if I was a little rambly. It's been a while since we talked about 40k, and I'm actually kind of excited about it. We're going to live stream some talk about the World Championships FAQ that was released, and that's probably an FAQ that I'm going to implement in events that I run, but we're going to go through it together. So look forward to that. As we wrap this up, big shout out to my immortals, Captain Too Tall, the real Donnie G, Lord Wellingstone, and Daniel Bodecker. Again, your support is awesome. I appreciate it. And links on the screen, links in the description. Don't forget there's a giveaway. We're almost there, guys. We need 5 or 4 more subscribers. And we hit that goal. And then the next goal is the big 1K. So, again, big thank you to you guys. Make sure you're smashing those like buttons. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button and sharing videos. You guys are awesome. Thank you.